Welcome back to Spitball Cards. In today's video, we want to talk about position players and if being a one-tool versus five-tool player really even matters in baseball card collecting popularity and long-term value. So in this episode, we have me, Scott, we have Phil, Jeff, and Chris. Ty's not here this week. He'll be back next week. So guys, this all stemmed from a Instagram account called Ephus Pitch. Ephus Pitch, his name's Bill, and he posted a reel comparing Juan Soto to Edgar Martinez, who's other two? Prince Fielder and Juan Gonzalez, and saying that Juan Soto is a similar caliber player to those players. And he kind of jokingly said, oh, the Fielder one was just for fun. Said that after. I don't know if he actually felt that at first, but either way, he did say that. And I want to ask you, is Juan Soto those players, or is Juan Soto generational? And his argument against it was that he's a one-tool player. He's a bad defender. He's a bad base runner. He's bad at everything but hitting. And my question is, does that matter? Can you be a good enough hitter? Where does it matter how you play in other positions, other parts of the game, I should say? Or do you need to be an all-around player in order to have value in the hobby and in baseball? So we're going to talk about Juan Soto, yes. But we're also going to be talking about just five-tool players versus one or two-tool players moving forward. I want to hear your thoughts, Jeff. What do you think?
Oh, man, where to start with this? Well, there was a much better, well-known one-tool player by the name of Big Papi David Ortiz, and he's got a nice collector base. I'm not sure why Bill didn't include him in the comps. And as far as Soto versus those three that he mentioned, Edgar Martinez, I know, is a favorite comp, but he wasn't even a regular until he was older than Soto is now. So I don't see that as a very good comp. Soto's beloved by a lot of people. And did you guys see the Soto shuffle by the kids in the stands?
The Canadian Little League team. Yeah, that was great.
Great. So I feel like he, besides his ability to hit for power and take walks, he is a charismatic guy and that people like to watch him. So I feel like he will be collected even just for those reasons. And some of the other stuff, he's come back to league average almost for defense. He was a really poor defender. He's getting better, or at least acceptable. And same with base running. So it's not like he's completely devoid of any of those abilities. And I think it'll hinge a lot on if he stays in New York. And if he does, I think the sky's the limit for his cards, or at least he will be collected. Let's say that.
I agree. Okay, Phil, what do you think?
Well, I PC'd Juan Soto before he was a member of the Yankees, and you could look at what he's been doing this year, and maybe there's going to be a point in August, maybe it's already baked in, that it's a lock that the Yankees are going to re-sign him, and that's going to give him a lot of hobby appeal. But I don't think that even matters. Again, I was PCing the dude who knew was a national, and I think, yes, five tools are great. You look back at some of the world's greatest players of all time, Willie Mays, Mike Trout, Mickey Mantle. It sure gives you, in theory, a higher floor because you can contribute in many different ways. And yes, Soto probably will never be an above average defender. And if so, not by much. He's probably not going to be very fast or much faster than he is today, if at all. But the most important stat, in my opinion, in today's game is something known as OPS plus or WRC plus, which is the offensive component that goes into B WAR and F WAR respectively. And even if you look at the last few years, it's not always the guy that finishes with the top WAR that wins MVP. The offensive part of the equation matters more. So there's a little bit of a bias there. And they tend to look at, for instance, Goldschmidt's WAR probably wasn't like 2 or 3 points away from Nolan Arenado, but the offensive side of the equation, the OPS plus, was by far the highest in the league, and that's why he won the MVP. That's why Ohtani's probably going to win the MVP, maybe unanimously, because he stands out from Ketel Marte and others in the NL. So, Juan Soto, he's in a class of his own because he started early, which matters a lot from a cumulative perspective, but also because he can put together, he's had already a season with a WRC plus or OPS plus in that sort of super elite territory. So from a WRC plus perspective, that's like 200. He's done that once. He's come close another season, and he's coming close to that mark this season as well. And that matters a lot for collectability, matters a lot for MVPs, it matters a lot for the Hall of Fame eventually. And he could get better. This is the first season where he's perhaps going to get to 40 home runs. Up till last year, he had only eclipsed 30 home runs once in what is the first 5 years of his career. So where Bill's going, I mean, there's some counterpoints to Soto. He hasn't won an MVP yet. This is his 7th year in the league. Ohtani's on the brink of potentially winning his 3rd in 7 years. It took Trout, I think, 9 years to win 3. So Soto hasn't really had that massive standout season until this year, in my opinion. Although you could look at some previous years, look at his OPS, look at that WRC plus, and it was higher. This year, the power is standing out. And that's what we needed to see, I think. Because then it kind of opens up a new, it's like breaking down a barrier to get to that 8 WAR. He hasn't surpassed a 7 F4 at all yet in his career up till this year, and it took 7 seasons. But again, he's still
he's 25 though.
Exactly.
Like, and he's a young 25. He turns 26 in like middle of October. So
yeah. So just some counterpoints, because some people might have those, but he has everything that I'd want him to have, and he's doing it in the right manner. He's consistent throughout the season. He's going to go through spurts where he kind of turns it off. He has some sort of mechanical glitch, and then he fixes it. Season to season, though, he's fairly consistent compared with other players. He doesn't have durability issues. And him being not super flashy from a defensive standpoint or from a stolen base standpoint, that keeps him on the field versus some other guys that have had issues with that are more 5-toolsy.
Mm-hmm. Shots fired, Phil. Shots fired. I will also say in Soto, in the check marks for Soto, is he has moments. Like when we think of big name players, we want to remember specific things, like specific moments that happened. One player that I would sort of compare with Soto is Frank Thomas, almost like a right-handed hitting Soto, except he played first base. Soto plays the outfield. But Frank Thomas has no big postseason moments. And if you really think about Frank Thomas's career, like there aren't these big, flashy, big highlights. I don't like off the top of my head. I can't think of anything incredible. I know his numbers were great, but does he have any huge, like specific moments? No. Like we think about Griffey, we think about him scoring that run to beat the Yankees. Like we see that in our heads immediately. With Soto, I can see him, Jeff, close your ears. We can see him like getting that hit off Hader to beat the Nationals. We can see him shuffling in the World Series against Houston. Remember the bat drop at first base? Like that stuff is there. Like he has these moments, and that really adds to collectability on top of the fact 100%. That he is 25 years old and is already putting up really impressive counting stats like year in and year out.
Chris, to add on top of that, in that same postseason run, he really could have won the World Series MVP. He took Cole and Verlander deep and Kershaw deep in very key situations. Kershaw actually tied the game in the
game 5.
Yep, game 5. Like he was critical. And then in the World Series, if you go watch his postseason highlights from that run, it's insane. And that's not abnormal for Juan Soto. Let me share my screen. We're going to get into some stats real quick. And these stats won't be that bad. So just stick with me here. But here is Soto, because the big argument is, well, all he does is walk. And like he doesn't try to swing. Here is Juan Soto in high leverage situations. 369 batting average, 1.146 OPS. Yes, only 5 home runs, but 24 RBI. And we can see he's way better in clutch situations with runners in scoring position. He has his 2 outs, runners in scoring position. He has his best stats. Like he is that player. He is that guy. And the thing is, he already has those big postseason moments. That's already going to be something he always has. We lack that in Trout. Maybe Trout's compared to Frank Thomas, where what do you remember with Trout? He has some cool catches in the outfield and things like that. But Soto already has that when he's aged, 20 or 19? A lot of players wish they could have that.
I hate to say this about Trout. I think Trout's 2 most memorable moments, at least for me. One is that like crazy over the fence catch
in Camden Yards. Yeah,
I've seen that highlight a million times, and the other one is him striking out against Shohei Ohtani to end the World Baseball Classic. Those are the first 2 Mike Trout highlights that my brain Rolodex pulls up.
Yeah, it's a great point. And the thing is, Soto already has more than that.
Yes.
I do want to pull up. Oh, one thing we need to talk about that's negative about Soto is 3 teams in 7 years. That sucks, but that's all trades, not his fault. I think he's going to, whoever he lands with next, it's going to be a 15-year deal with no opt-outs or something crazy. And then that's who he's going to be remembered as. Hopefully it's a Yankee. Let's compare him to Prince Fielder through their age 25 seasons. Are these players comparable, guys? What do you think?
The facial expressions, I think, answer the question.
Okay, let's compare him to Juan Gonzalez through age 25.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, even Gonzalez is confused by this one.
Yeah.
And then the last one's Edgar. Edgar's more okay with it. He's
Look at that age.
0.2 WAR versus 36 WAR. And I understand games played. We're not stupid. But I want to point out he still has that on his side, and that's why he's going to have great career numbers.
And repeatedly, we've been told that hitters, and this has been backed up by most statistics, that they hit their hitting prime ages 27, usually is the earliest, to the early 30s. So Soto just seems to be getting better. He's already developed a lot of what the best hitters have done in terms of his maturity, taking pitches, being able to walk, consistently getting on base. Yeah, he had a season where he had a down batting average, but his OBP was still over 400. He's still getting on base at an elite clip, even if he's not hitting for average. So I think he's only continuing to get better.
Yeah, and I did want to point out 116 games played his rookie year, 150. This year he had COVID, which is why he didn't play the whole season. 151, 153, 162, on pace for over 150 games. That's something that's also rare in today's game. And that's kind of the benefit of being a more one-tool guy. I also want to point out, though, like according to not Fangraphs, Baseball Reference, which uses defensive runs saved, he has 0.2 WAR and D-WAR this year. So he's actually been above average according to Baseball Reference. And if we go to MLB outs above average real fast, I bet we can see he's really not doing that bad. He's average defensively. Like, he's not a negative defender this year. And so that's not even an argument against him, in my opinion. Base running, yes, that's a negative. He's slow, but that's okay. Some people are slow. Mookie Betts is below average on the base paths. Below average speed, above average with bags he takes, that type of thing. I want to compare him with a few other players. So we had Edgar, we had Juan Gonzalez, and Prince Fielder. Who is Soto really comparable to? Here's a few that I could think of. Very first one, well, this is one more you brought up. David Ortiz. This is Soto versus Ortiz through their age 25 season. You said this, Jeff, so I pulled it up at the beginning. Anyways.
Scott, does that crowd have their hat sizes? I'd be curious what hat size David Ortiz wears. That looks like it's got to be, I don't know, like an 11. Does it even go up that
barely
high?
Fits. Barely fits.
Yeah,
barely in the photo. I mean, good Lord.
Scott, before you leave this one, this is to my point that these guys their games tend to last a bit longer because they're not facing the similar breakdown of their body as they get to their mid-30s. And eventually Ortiz, that's why he had to retire, not because his skills were diminished. His feet weren't working anymore. But if Soto manages to play anywhere near the age of Ortiz, look where Ortiz was at this point in his career. Yeah.
A lot of these guys had a career arc that was aided by some additional stuff, if you know what I mean. Three of the first four you showed probably were on some sort of juice.
Yeah.
It was just improvements in fitness, Phil. That's all. So dietitians,
So here's the player I want to compare him to next, Bryce Harper. I know Bill loves Bryce Harper. What's the difference between these two? They both debuted at 19. Harper's played more games, and Soto's just been better. Like, in my opinion, maybe I'm wrong, he's just been a better player offensively and defensively. And so it's hard for me to say, okay, well, Juan Soto is overrated without saying other players are overrated. Harper has 2 MVPs, but Jeff, you mentioned a few other players have multiple MVPs.
Yeah, well, Juan Gonzalez, we saw there, had multiple MVPs, and other really good players like Dale Murphy, who, as Chris mentioned before we got on, has a very loyal following in Atlanta and around the Georgia area, but he's not widely collected amongst collectors several years after he's retired. I don't think Harper's that, but Harper hasn't been the most consistent. We've talked about that a lot on this show. He's had a couple monster seasons, and that resulted in his MVPs, but his consistency hasn't really been there exactly. So yeah, I mean, you look at the other awards, that's
I will also say Harper's first MVP was an amazing year, unreal year, but his second one was kind of in a down MVP voting year. And so that also helps. And that's what Soto's going against with Bobby Witt Jr. and Aaron Judge. Speaking of Bobby Witt Jr., he's 24. Juan Soto's 25. These are both of them through their age 24 seasons. If you love Bobby Witt, like just to give reference of where Soto's at in his career so far. Might not be fair, but I at least wanted to discuss it with you guys to show he debuted later, and he has a lot of work to do to even catch Soto about where he was at the same time frame. So kind of an interesting comparison. I know there's more games played, but that's the debut aspect. So
Mark DeRosa did say that Bobby Witt is a top 5 face of baseball right now, though, in his opinion.
He did.
And I don't know if Soto was on that list.
No.
He probably wasn't. but that's okay.
Bobby Witt's got a case of if you watch The Simpsons, he's got a case of Millhouse eyes. I don't know, like they are just like tiny little eyes, and somehow like this vision is impressive. Sorry, that's unrelated.
That's why such a good defender. You can see things that we can't.
Yeah, like laser eyes.
And then here's Miguel Cabrera through their age 25 season. Pretty good hitter, I've heard. Only a hitter who has a lot of value. Pretty comparable player, I'd say. Soto's still a better defender than Miggy ever was. Interesting fact about Miggy. Actually, let's go look at his baseball reference page real quick.
Yeah, you're pulling that up. I think. Oh, sorry, Jeff. I was going to say the question about this comparison wouldn't be their numbers, but was Miguel Cabrera like highly collected? Is he still highly collected? Is he popular in the hobby?
I think so. I mean, not as much as that's another thing we have to talk about. Highly collected. The things that can make someone highly collected, what are they? Like, I feel like we've seen with 90s cards, Larry Walker cards, I pay attention to those that care about him. They're even going crazy. It only takes a few collectors for the good stuff to be valuable.
True. And Cabrera really has one card. Like all the interest in him would be funneled into exactly one card, one Topps update on card auto from 2000 that's it. Like that's his big card. And he has some moments and he has multiple MVPs and a Triple Crown. But like, I don't know. How often do people right now talk about collecting Miguel Cabrera?
Yeah, so this could support that argument. But either way.
I know one guy, super collector, Triple Crown 24.
Yeah, I'm sure they're out there.
Even he stopped buying them. But yeah, I mean, compared to Ichiro Pujols, he's a class below in collectability. Or at least if they're the 1A, then he's the 1B.
So here's the question.
And some of that might come down to position. I know he played third base for a little bit. Like these first 5 years, he probably played third base for all 5. I'm guessing, but people remember him as a first baseman. And I feel like that isn't always the best recipe for long-term collectability.
Yeah, I would say he and Soto have a lot in common the more I think about it, because they were both in the playoffs really young and they both have really big moments in the playoffs. Like if I think about Miguel Cabrera, I'm just picturing him taking Clemens deep in the World Series in 2003 at the age of 20. Like that was a pretty iconic moment, like led the Marlins win that World Series. And then he won the Triple Crown. I can't think of a specific like moment, but he did he ended his career poorly, at least like 4 really bad seasons. And I feel like people just forgot how good he was. So maybe there's a bump coming for him when he gets on the ballot.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't know. Like he was amazing. He was very similar. You could probably say he's like a right-handed Soto.
So here's his last 7 years of his career, 94 OPS plus. His career averages would have been a lot higher if it wasn't for that. Do we think Soto's going to have a better career stat line after the end of his career? I personally think there's a real chance of that. The 3,000 hits is going to be hard to catch for anybody, but stats, I think easily.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out you've got the chart here, and on a lot of these comparisons, Soto will be lower in hits. He's probably not a 3,000 hit guy because he walks so much. So he has 1,000 fewer hits or 100 fewer hits, and his OBP is still over 40 points higher than Cabrera. So it's going to be tough for Soto to get some of those counting stats like hits, but his rate stats and like Phil mentioned, his OPS plus is through the roof.
Okay. Any other thoughts on these two for anybody?
The WAR effect on first baseman. Yes. Like Pujols still stands out, but you kind of see that drop off in the WAR when you compare Pujols versus Cabrera, 2 corner infielders. And I think here with Miggy, if he played a little bit better to the formula, played up a bit with the walk rate, yes, it was decent, but I don't think we're talking like 11 to 12% averages throughout his career, like what Soto is going to be able to maintain. And that could make the difference in that OPS plus.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, next player. This is just Aaron Judge, both through their age 25 season. Again, this all comes down to debuting early, but it just shows how good Soto's been. So I want to point that out. Any thoughts on this before I jump to the next few real quick before we can move on from Soto?
Wow, Soto's so much better.
So much better.
Priced 5 times as high as Judge.
All right, this one, everybody says Bonds was a Hall of Famer before his steroid usage. Here they are through the same time frame in their careers. Same argument. Here's Bobby Witt. Okay, we did it all. So that's what I wanted just to share. So I guess my question is, where do we think Soto's going to end up? Who do we think Soto is now? Do we think that was accurate, not accurate? Final thoughts on Soto before we move on to something else.
All right, I'll go. My final thought is that your question that you began the show with is what determines collectability? Yes, numbers and success, hardware, championships, all that goes into it. but personality does too. And like Chris mentioned, moments and personality. And I think Soto's got that in spades. And again, he's only 25, but just seeing him out there, seeing the way fans react to him, seeing the fun he has with other players out there, it just, I feel like that's a huge check mark in his column as we go forward.
Yeah, I agree. You know, there's charisma, and then there's charisma that can act as a detriment, which I think has been the case for certain players in the league, and Soto is not there. Soto has the perfect amount of what I would call maturity and charisma, that balance, in my opinion. You know, it's very subjective, but I've thought that the entire time, even when he was dropping baseball bats to first base coaches, and a lot of people had an issue with that. And honestly, that could have cost him the MVP in the 2019 World Series. I thought he deserved it. They gave it to Strasburg, you know, and now Strasburg, you know, I wish they probably wish they could have gone back and changed that. Given where Strasburg,
he sold his soul for that World Series.
He was so good in that World Series. I just Strasburg earned that one. He was untouchable. He was great.
But I think like 30 years from now, I think Juan Soto versus Mookie Betts, I think that's interesting. So I kind of think Soto will end up with like an 80 to 90 WAR. I kind of think that he will be remembered as a, if not generational, then like a generational 1B type player. I think he's setting his career up to do so. Do you guys think that Mookie and Soto, so they contribute obviously very different players, different personalities, different markets in a way, even though, you know, Betts gets a little bump from Los Angeles, obviously top tier 1 market right behind the Yankees. But what do you guys think long term? Do you think that's like a fair comp to compare those two guys 30 years from now?
In regard to value, not production, right?
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to look at where their best cards are 30 years from now, given that they'll accumulate similar numbers very differently.
Yes. When we say numbers, we mean WAR numbers.
Just WAR. Yeah.
Because Mookie's at 70 WAR right now through age 31. So like he'll probably get to 100, and that's going to blow some people's minds when he retires if he stays healthy. I do agree, Phil. I think Soto's going to get up to high 60s to low 80s and easy Hall of Famer, in my opinion. Yeah. But what's more important? All-around player who gets his WAR through defense, base running, and offense, and has a 135 career OPS plus when it's all said and done, because he's at like a 140 right now. Or do you have a guy who has a 155 OPS plus who has more home runs and more RBI and a better on base and average? Like what's more valuable? That's the question we have to ask. So.
In this hobby, Scott, I can answer for you. The most valuable thing is hype, and that's it. And that's it. There's no other way to explain Paul Skeens, Bowman Chrome Autos outselling Mookie Betts. There's no other universe. There's no other word you can even come up with. I like Soto long term. I think I like some of his cards long term. He does have a lot of like secondary rookies that if he resigns with the Yankees, I would just get rid of immediately. Like he's not in that many sets, but he's still in a lot of sets. But I do wonder, like the only thing I've said it before, I think the only thing that can hurt him is if he leaves the Yankees.
Yeah, that's a good point.
4 teams, that's too many teams.
I think it's fun how him and Mookie are comparable, Phil, in regards to potential long-term value. I think they're pretty close. Soto, I think, actually could beat Mookie out. And if not, they'll be pretty close. But they both don't have very many like great rookie cards. And Mookie has even less. But I think that's a good comparison. What do you think, Jeff? Final thoughts?
I hadn't even thought of that. So I'm just I'm thinking about it now as you guys have been talking. I think that's a great question, Phil, just thinking about them. And I think, yeah, Chris is right. Hype has a lot to do with it. And also hope, right? I mean, Skeens, people are thinking, well, boy, if he pitches 18 years, 20 years, he could be the next 300-game winner. So while they're still young, there's all that hope. And Soto is still young. He's only 25. So I feel like in that 5 years between now and when he's Mookie's age, he could be in a similar position WAR-wise. And I just feel like his personality, that balance that Phil said, I think that's going to carry him a long way. I as a collector and as a baseball fan, I hope he stays in New York. He's not coming to Milwaukee, so I'd rather have him stay there.
Yeah. Rafael Devers having his best year at age 27, as we talked about. Players often don't peak offensively till age 27, 28. Look at Devers right now. He's killing it.
Yeah. Good point.
Damn right he is. Yeah, so in 30 years from now, I'm just curious. We won't come back and hold anyone accountable here, but which card would you rather have 30 years from now? Soto's Topps Chrome Update Gold Refractor or Betts's Topps Chrome Update Black Refractor?
Always go with gold. Always.
Gold out of 50, black out of 99.
I don't know. The hard thing is there are lower numbered cards below Soto. So you have the 25,
Yes.
the red, and super factor. There's nothing below that Mookie.
Basically, Mookie's best card.
There's not
Mookie's
even
best
one.
rookie, yeah.
So I don't know. I love Mookie Betts. I have enough. The good thing is these are like two of my favorite guys to collect. So
yeah, and they could be head to head in the World Series, 3 or 4 times in the next decade.
That's one thing Soto does have over Mookie is a postseason. It's something big experience. Mookie hasn't had that quite yet. Good in the last postseason. He had 2 home runs in the World Series, like an 8-something OPS. Like he had a good World Series, but not Soto-esque. But through 25, these are their stats. Through age 25, they both have 35-ish WARs done very, very differently from each other.
Yeah. Look at the games played difference and how similar the WAR is.
Yeah. Actually, Mookie Betts, one thing I love about him, that's not even getting to Mookie Betts. I like a lot of things. Let's keep going. That took restraint for all the viewers out there.
Stay focused, Scott. I'm very impressed. That was good on your part.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
And you didn't even click on the Billy Butler tab either, so good for you.
I'm not going to say that name. It's like Voldemort for our fans. All right. Well, other than that, thank you for watching. Let us in the comments down below what your thoughts are on regards to Soto's cards, 5-tool players versus 1-tool players. And other than that, we'll see you in the next episode.